For the time being, it's impossible for me to take my family back to the UK safely. Well, for a start, the only time that I've come back to the UK is...
Prince Harry expected distance from the palace. He expected cold statements, uncomfortable silences, perhaps even another carefully managed snub. What he did not expect was to discover that his invitation to Trooping the Colour had quietly disappeared, and that the decision had come through Princess Anne. There was no public announcement, no dramatic confrontation, no warning call. Just one closed door, one altered guest list, and a realization that struck far harder than any headline. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Harry stared at the confirmation. Trooping the Colour is the monarch's official birthday parade, a royal ceremony where military pageantry and family attendance signal who stands close to the crown. For him, absence would not look casual. It would look deliberate. Then the truth became impossible to soften. Anne had quietly revoked his invitation before final arrangements were issued, and his name had been removed from the approved royal list. Harry read the message twice, then placed his phone face down. He had endured clashes with William and colder moments with Charles, but this felt different. Anne had rarely placed herself at the center of their family conflict, making her decision more unsettling. The Princess Royal, Charles's sister and one of the monarchy's senior working figures, had not merely stayed silent, she had acted. Harry stood, crossed the room, then turned back with disbelief tightening his voice. "Anne did this?" he asked. The answer carried another sting. A scheduling aide noticed that Harry was not marked simply as not attending. His name had vanished from the ceremonial circulation list, the internal schedule used to coordinate who is included and how attendance is managed. That distinction mattered. Someone had made a conscious administrative decision, not guessed he would stay away. Anne had supported the change personally, before Harry was given a chance to respond. That silence made the removal feel colder than any public rejection. Anne had not acted in anger. Behind the decision sat a private Windsor discussion known to only a small circle, and whatever had been said there had shifted her from observer to gatekeeper. Harry would soon learn that she believed something had happened months earlier that made his presence impossible to defend. That discovery would hurt more than the lost invitation, because it suggested the decision was not punishment for one bad week. It was the final consequence of a much older fracture. And to understand why Anne became the one royal willing to remove Harry's name, the story must first turn to the three people carrying the heaviest personal stakes behind that single decision. Prince Harry expected distance from the palace. He expected cold statements, uncomfortable silences, perhaps even another carefully managed snub. What he did not expect was to discover that his invitation to Trooping the Colour had quietly disappeared, and that the decision had come through Princess Anne. There was no public announcement, no dramatic confrontation, no warning call, just one closed door, one altered guest list, and a realization that struck far harder than any headline. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Harry stared at the confirmation. Trooping the Colour is the monarch's official birthday parade, a royal ceremony where military pageantry and family attendance signal who stands close to the crown. For him, absence would not look casual, it would look deliberate. Then the truth became impossible to soften. Anne had quietly revoked his invitation before final arrangements were issued, and his name had been removed from the approved royal list. Harry read the message twice, then placed his phone face down. He had endured clashes with William and colder moments with Charles, but this felt different. Anne had rarely placed herself at the center of their family conflict, making her decision more unsettling. The Princess Royal, Charles's sister and one of the monarchy's senior working figures, had not merely stayed silent. She had acted. Harry stood, crossed the room, then turned back with disbelief tightening his voice. "Anne did this?" he asked. The answer carried another sting. A scheduling aide noticed that Harry was not marked simply as not attending. His name had vanished from the ceremonial circulation list, the internal schedule used to coordinate who is included and how attendance is managed. That distinction mattered. Someone had made a conscious administrative decision, not guessed he would stay away. Anne had supported the change personally, before Harry was given a chance to respond. That silence made the removal feel colder than any public rejection. Anne had not acted in anger. Behind the decision sat a private Windsor discussion known to only a small circle, and whatever had been said there had shifted her from observer to gatekeeper. Harry would soon learn that she believed something had happened months earlier that made his presence impossible to defend. That discovery would hurt more than the lost invitation, because it suggested the decision was not punishment for one bad week. It was the final consequence of a much older fracture. And to understand why Anne became the one royal willing to remove Harry's name, the story must first turn to the three people carrying the heaviest personal stakes behind that single decision. Months before Harry's Trooping the Color invitation disappeared, the royal family gathered for a private dinner at Windsor. There were no cameras, no crowds, and no ceremonial speeches. Yet by the end of that evening, Princess Anne's view of her nephew had changed decisively. Nothing exploded in public. No one stormed from the room. But one conversation crossed a line she would later refuse to forget. Charles arranged the dinner because strained communication had reduced family contact to aides, statements, and managed messages. He hoped a private meal could reopen limited contact with Harry away from public scrutiny. Windsor, one of the monarch's royal residences, offered the privacy he wanted. Anne attended reluctantly, but she agreed because her brother wanted relatives speaking directly instead of through palace machinery. Harry tried to explain why silence made him feel trapped. Then he repeated details from an earlier confidential palace discussion and said he needed freedom to tell his side, if challenged publicly. The words changed Anne's expression. The Princess Royal, the title traditionally held by the sovereign's eldest daughter, heard something more dangerous than frustration. She heard a warning that private family conversations might later become public ammunition. Anne leaned forward and asked one question. Could anything discussed that evening remain entirely inside the room? Harry hesitated. It lasted seconds, but she noticed. He argued that silence had repeatedly allowed others to define him, and that defending himself was not betrayal. She heard it differently. To her, self-defense without clear limits could never sit comfortably beside access to sensitive royal spaces, private schedules, or family movements. Harry felt cornered and said he was being asked to accept accusations without answering them. Anne did not raise her voice. She told him trust could not survive if every private exchange carried a future condition. Charles watched them, saying little, because he understood why the moment mattered. His son wanted protection from public judgment. His sister wanted protection from private uncertainty. The door closed after Harry left. Anne remained beside the table while Charles stayed seated, exhausted. She told him quietly, "This cannot keep happening." The king lowered his eyes. She then said she would not support placing Harry in settings where confidential conversations, family logistics, and senior royal movements overlapped unless a firm boundary existed. Charles did not agree, but he did not reject her warning either. Months later, that silence would matter when trooping arrangements reached Anne's desk. When Harry discovered this dinner had helped cost him his invitation, disbelief would harden into anger. What began months earlier as one uncomfortable pause at a private dinner was now heading toward the confrontation neither Harry nor Anne could avoid. Harry did not want another aide, another carefully worded message, or another explanation passed through palace channels. He wanted Princess Anne herself. When the two finally spoke privately, there were no cameras and no family members positioned between them. He arrived angry but controlled. She was calm, almost painfully so, and within minutes, what had been described as a guest list decision became a brutal argument about loyalty, privacy, and whether royal blood still guaranteed royal trust. Harry had demanded the conversation after confirming Anne personally authorized his removal. He refused to let something this painful be reduced to administrative language. She agreed, but only if no aides attended, because she wanted no later confusion about who had spoken or whether staff had shaped the decision. The Princess Royal, a senior title traditionally given to the monarch's eldest daughter, understood exactly what her involvement signaled. Trooping the color, the monarch's official birthday parade, carried more than ceremonial weight for him. Attendance meant belonging. Exclusion meant the family had drawn a visible line. Harry asked why he had not been allowed to decline on his own terms. His voice tightened as he accused his aunt of humiliating him before he had even chosen whether to attend. Anne answered without raising hers. She said the issue was no longer whether he would have come. Royal participation, she argued, could not depend on last-minute negotiations, media calculations, or uncertainty over whether private encounters might later become public. Anne then gave him the detail that changed the room. She had raised the matter with Charles before removing the invitation, and the king, the reigning monarch and head of the royal institution, had not stopped her. Harry stared at her. His anger shifted instantly, because what had felt like one aunt's judgment now carried his father's silent approval. She did not soften the next part. The Windsor dinner had been the decisive moment. Harry pushed his chair back and stood. Anne remained seated. She told him she was not accusing him of leaking that specific conversation. The problem was his inability to promise absolute privacy when she asked. He said he had a right to defend himself. She replied quietly, "Affection and trust are not the same thing." Harry froze, then slowly sat again. The confrontation ended without reconciliation. Harry left carrying something heavier than anger. If Anne could remove him from one of the monarchy's defining ceremonies, how much authority had she quietly gained inside the family? That question followed him long after leaving. The answer would reveal that Anne's power did not come from a title alone. It came from the one thing the palace valued most during crisis: reliability. Princess Anne had not seized control of the monarchy, nor had she needed to. Her influence came from something far more difficult to challenge: decades of consistency. When family disputes became volatile, she rarely spoke publicly. When ceremonies became complicated, she focused on procedure. And when King Charles faced a choice he could not bear to make personally, Anne became the figure capable of making it for him, even when the person on the other side was his own son. Charles trusted her because she rarely confused family emotion with royal responsibility. Over time, Anne had become one of his most dependable internal voices on ceremonial discipline, attendance expectations, and protecting major occasions from personal turmoil. Trooping the color, the monarch's official birthday parade, requires tightly coordinated security, seating, arrival sequences, balcony arrangements, and family positioning. Harry's uncertain status therefore created more than emotional discomfort. It created a practical problem that could affect the entire event. Charles felt that weight when the revised attendance list reached him. He ran one finger across the place where Harry's name had been removed, and admitted the most painful royal decisions rarely announce themselves with shouting. Sometimes they appear as an empty chair removed from a seating plan, a name missing from a schedule, or an arrival route that no longer needs to be considered. As trooping the color preparations continued, Harry's absence began taking physical form inside the palace. And for those who remembered him as a boy standing beside the same family, the new arrangements carried an unmistakable sense of finality. Palace staff quietly revised arrival instructions, family groupings, and internal briefing papers until Harry was no longer treated as a possible attendee. Those briefing papers were working documents used to coordinate movements, timings, and responsibilities during a major royal event. What had once been an emotional argument was now becoming procedure. Anne's decision had crossed from private judgment into practical reality, and every alteration made reversal harder. William noticed the change immediately. He understood why certainty mattered, because trooping the color depended on carefully timed arrivals, security movements, and family positioning. Yet seeing his brother disappear from the arrangements carried a different weight. The prince did not celebrate. He studied the revised family positioning for several moments, folded the page slowly, and asked whether Charles had spoken to Harry directly. Harry received his own confirmation through a private message from a family aide. Anger came first. He demanded to know whether anything remained open for discussion, then fell quiet when the answer became clear. Final arrangements had already been approved without him. No seat awaited him. No arrival plan included him. For the first time, he understood that there was nothing left to negotiate unless Charles personally intervened. The aide then gave Harry another detail that deepened the wound. Anne had rejected suggestions that his absence should be described as voluntary. She believed such wording would create a false impression that he had simply chosen not to attend. The Princess Royal was prepared to accept criticism rather than disguise the decision she had made. Harry heard the message clearly. His aunt was not retreating, apologizing, or allowing palace language to soften what had happened. William heard that Charles still had not called his younger son. His expression hardened. He could accept the need for a clear ceremonial boundary, but he feared silence was turning that boundary into something far more permanent. Harry had lost an invitation. The future king now worried his father might lose much more if he allowed the hurt to settle unanswered. William finally told Charles that the absence itself was no longer the greatest danger. The silence between father and son was. That pressure leads to the most important private conversation of the entire crisis, one in which titles and palace procedure finally disappear from the room. For days, the dispute had been discussed through lists, aids, schedules, and ceremonial language. Then King Charles finally called Harry himself. No advisors joined them. No statement was prepared in advance. For the first time since the invitation disappeared, father and son spoke without an institutional buffer. Harry wanted to know whether Charles had chosen Anne's judgment over him. The king's answer was more painful, because it was neither a denial nor an apology. Charles made the call after William warned him that continued silence would become its own message. The prince feared Harry would read that silence as proof that his father no longer wanted him inside the family. Anne had already revoked the invitation, but trooping the color, the monarch's official birthday parade and one of the crown's most important public ceremonies, was only part of the damage. The deeper risk was personal. If the king stayed quiet, the absence could become a permanent emotional wound. Harry answered expecting one of two things. He thought Charles would either reverse Anne's decision or separate himself from it. Instead, his father told him he had never wanted the invitation withdrawn, but he had accepted her reasoning. He could not guarantee the ceremony would remain free from renewed tension, private arguments, or another public dispute afterward. Harry heard the distinction, but it offered little comfort. Acceptance still meant the decision stood. Harry finally said what had been building inside him. Being excluded without a direct conversation made him feel less like a son and more like a problem being managed. Charles went quiet. The accusation struck harder because he knew there was truth inside it. He admitted he should have called earlier, and for once, there was no palace language to hide behind. The king had delayed because he feared the conversation. That delay had only made the hurt worse. Charles then made one point unmistakably clear. Anne's decision applied to this trooping the color ceremony. It was not a formal order cutting Harry out of every future family occasion. Yet Harry understood the deeper message immediately. Future access would no longer come automatically through birth. Trust would have to be rebuilt first, and his father was no longer willing to override that principle simply to avoid pain. The silence at the end lasted several seconds. Charles reached toward the telephone, as though reluctant to end the call. Harry finally said, "I understand what you're telling me." Neither man pretended forgiveness had arrived. Neither claimed the damage was repaired. The invitation remained gone. But Harry's response changed completely. And once the world noticed that silence, Harry's missing place at trooping the color, became impossible to treat as merely a private family matter. By the morning the story broke, Harry's absence was no longer confined to palace corridors. It was on television screens, newspaper stands, radio discussions, and phones across Britain. Yet the detail that captured public attention was not simply that he would miss trooping the color, it was that Princess Anne had been the one to remove him. Suddenly, a private act of royal discipline had become a national argument over duty, family, forgiveness, and the limits of belonging. Anne became the center of the storm almost instantly. For years, she had been associated with discipline, service, and restraint, rather than public family feuds, which made her involvement feel unusually serious. Trooping the Color, the monarch's official birthday parade, and one of the crown's most visible annual ceremonies, had suddenly become a test of who still stood inside the trusted royal circle. Palace communications stayed brief, confirming only finalized attendance arrangements and refusing to debate private family conversations. Harry watched the coverage with growing frustration. Commentators reduced the dispute to winners and losers, as though a painful family rupture could be scored like a political contest. He considered answering immediately, but the private conversation with Charles still weighed on him. Instead of issuing a statement, he remained silent. That restraint surprised palace officials who had prepared for a sharp public response and suggested the king's words had genuinely altered his approach. Anne felt no satisfaction in becoming the symbol of Harry's exclusion. She told an aide privately that the ceremony could not become a referendum on her nephew. Yet she, trooping the color, went ahead without Prince Harry. There was no dramatic last-minute arrival, no reversal from King Charles, and no unexpected compromise from Princess Anne. The ceremony continued with the precision the monarchy has always demanded. Yet beneath that familiar order sat a truth the family could no longer disguise. Harry had not simply missed an event. For the first time, everyone involved had accepted that royal belonging now came with conditions he could no longer assume would be waived. Anne watched the day unfold without uncertainty. Trooping the Color, the monarch's official birthday parade, had proceeded carefully under the revised plan before the watching world, with no last-minute negotiation, no changed security route, and no confusion over family positioning. That was what she wanted. Yet success brought no satisfaction. The Princess Royal knew she had protected a boundary she believed necessary, but she also knew she had personally delivered a wound her nephew would remember. Charles carried the cost differently. He fulfilled every public duty expected of the sovereign, the reigning head of the monarchy, while privately feeling the absence of his younger son. After the ceremony, the king removed his gloves, sat quietly, and asked whether Harry had watched. When an aide admitted no one knew, he nodded once and looked away. The question revealed how deeply the separation still mattered. Harry chose silence. He did not attack Anne or blame Charles publicly. When the first images reached him, he studied them briefly, then locked his phone without comment. His restraint was not surrender. It was recognition that another immediate battle would only confirm the fears that had helped push him outside the ceremony in the first place. William understood the lesson with painful clarity. The prince saw that reconciliation could never be built through invitations alone. Public closeness meant little if private confidence remained broken. Harry might still be Charles's son and William's brother, but ceremonial access now depended on trust rather than birthright. The decision therefore meant far more than one missing invitation. Anne had drawn a boundary the family had avoided for years. Charles had accepted the emotional cost of refusing to overrule it. Harry had discovered that royal history could preserve his identity without guaranteeing his place inside the working circle of the crown. There was no further door waiting to open after trooping the color. The decision had been made, the ceremony had passed, and the royal family emerged changed, not healed, not reunited, but finally clear about the boundary between blood, trust, and duty. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.